You want to be a professional writer. You want to be a great writer. Maybe you even published your first novel. So you buy courses, you go to conferences, you network for hours every day. You join groups where you can try to seem like you're casually pushing your book and just hoping that someone will care. You've added every single writer who you can find the contact information of on social media. During some of those hours a day, you you repost their promotion posts and post promotion posts of your own, hoping that they will repost them on their pages in a big circle. I don't know if it's coming through, but there is a reason that you are not progressing towards that goal of becoming a great writer. And there is a solution for it. But first, we're going to need to lay some groundwork. There was a time in my life about 8 years ago where a lot happened, both good and bad. The best thing was my son was born. A bad thing is that my publisher went bankrupt and my entire back catalog of books, excepting the few that I had initially self-published, which got their attention, went out of print. The day job that I had, which had allowed me to very easily save my energy for writing, my writer's day job, laid me off. They actually got rid of the entire department. One good thing that happened is that there was a computer programming boot camp that I had been watching for quite a few years, and it finally opened up in Kansas City. So I'd lost my publisher, I'd lost the job that allowed me to easily write every day. I had a 9-month-old son who depended on me, a sense of responsibility that you kind of can't get from anywhere else. It's having an entirely helpless person dependent upon you. And so I switched gears. I started studying computer programming as hard as I could. I um, completely fried my brain. I pushed writing totally onto the back burner. I didn't have the mental energy after doing all of that studying, and the boot camp was pretty intensive and took a lot of my time because I did every bit of the work as well as I could, because I knew that in order to get a job, I needed to be at the top of the class. And I was at the top of the class. And when LaunchCode actually interviewed me, they decided that they were going to put my resume out there. And I got a job very quickly, very soon after, for a very large marketing company. And that's good, right? So I went in there and realized that I knew absolutely nothing about programming. I was tossed kind of into the deep end in just realizing that I had no idea what I was doing. I faced the same thing that every programmer goes through, in that I had absolutely no concept of what it was like to work with a gigantic code base and do the version control um, and try to figure out what is doing what. Every new programmer, every junior programmer faces that. I had the additional disadvantage of not coming from a programming background, of having only the most utilitarian understanding of anything, no theory. So in order to make sure that I passed this paid internship and continued on and was offered a position, I studied for hours still every day on top of working a full day. And it didn't stop with the internship. I had so much that I needed to know. So I just kept studying, waking up early, and putting my best hours, the time when my brain is the most active and creative, I was putting it towards learning my new career. This went on for years. When people would ask me what I did before I had this job, I would say that I was a writer, and I would mention my day job, but my identity, like what I said I was a writer. And I stopped doing that because I wasn't writing, and I didn't know if I would ever get back to it. I was working a lot of unpaid overtime, and while I had hoped that computer programming and fiction writing used different parts of the brain, for me at least, it's very similar parts of the brain, and once the one was worn out, there wasn't room for the other, and I couldn't put my best hours towards writing and go into work and work not in top form. So after 20 years of writer being my core identity, I gave it up. So there is this really awesome, I hate to call it like a self-help book or even self-improvement because there's so much utter trash in those fields. And this is really more of a practical psychology book, I think is a nice way to try to distinguish these things. By James Clear, called Atomic Habits. You've probably heard of it. If you haven't read it, you should really read it. The premise of the book is that changing habits is difficult. Everyone knows this, and that human beings don't like doing difficult things. So we need to do everything possible to make doing the right thing as easy as possible and doing the bad thing as hard and unappealing as possible. James Clear explains that two of the sources of difficulty with changing habits is that we, one, try to change the wrong thing, and two, we try to change our habits in the wrong way. This video is concerned with that first reason. We try to change the wrong thing. This is where your current behavior when spending your writing time is not moving you towards your goal. So there are three levels at which change can occur. The first layer is changing your outcomes. This level is concerned with changing your results, losing weight, publishing a book, winning a championship. Most of the goals you set are associated with this level of change. So like the self-help world, especially the kind that's not rooted in science, is way too focused on goals. It's just constant goal setting. I even just recently read a book where essentially you turned your goals into affirmations that you were supposed to repeat for 10 minutes every morning. It's constantly revising, tweaking, reminding yourself what your goals are. The best thing that you can do is to set your goals, set the processes that you know will take you towards those goals, and occasionally review both. Review if the processes are allowing you to make progress, review if your goal is still the same. So we mentioned process. The second layer is changing your process. This level is concerned with changing your habits and systems, implementing a new routine at the gym, decluttering your desk for better workflow, developing a meditation practice. Most of the habits you build are associated with this level. So I am all about systems. I am all about process. As a writer, you have to be, because if you are focused only on the goal, you are going to lose the war of attrition, because that is going to take a long time to reach. Writing is one of the most difficult things that you can do to get any sort of outside achievement, outside acknowledgement. If your goals are anything but internal, you're just going to be disappointed. The main thing to do is to fall in love with the process, fall in love with the grind. One, the reality of writing is that it is an accumulation of instances of work. It is the ultimate marathon. It is a marathon that lasts for years. And if you don't enjoy this, you need to switch mediums. You need to do something where you can get your public accolades more quickly. You need to do something that has a higher barrier to entry than writing. Every single person knows how to spell. And how many times have you heard that every single person has a book in them? Nobody thinks that everyone can make a video game. Nobody thinks that they're going to get into animation. Even painting, oil painting, is too much for most people to jump into. But everybody has a word processing program. So if you aren't in this to stand out against all those people for the long haul, you're not going to make it. You know, like the Bhagavad Gita says, you have the rights to your labor. You don't have the rights to the fruit of your labor. Laboring is within you. It's within your control. The fruits of your labor is what that external world decides. And if you can't accept this, then not only won't you have peace, likely you won't last long enough to ever see success. And then, according to James Clear, there is a third level, a deeper one. The third and deepest layer is changing your identity. This level is concerned with changing your beliefs, your worldview, your self-image, your judgments about yourself and others. Most of the beliefs, assumptions, and biases you hold are associated with this level. Outcomes are about what you get. Processes are about what you do. Identity is about what you believe. So he explains that the levels aren't better or worse, even though the identity is the deepest. Every level is required in order to form good habits, move forward in life, build the life that you want. You need to set goals so that you know what processes are necessary, for example. But he does say that there is an issue with the way that we typically view these things. The problem is the direction of change. Many people begin the process of changing their habits by focusing on what they want to achieve. This leads us to outcome-based habits. The alternative is to build identity-based habits. With this approach, we start by focusing on who we wish to become. So as I said, the self-help world is obsessed with the goal-setting part. But this level of focus on the goals is not helping. It is wasted energy. You know what you want. Review every once in a while to make sure that it's still what you want. Otherwise, focus on the process, especially as a writer. So James Clear gives an example of what he means when he's talking about the direction of change. It really helps to make it concrete. Imagine two people resisting a cigarette. When offered a smoke, the first person says, "No thanks, I'm trying to quit." It sounds like a reasonable response, but this person still believes they are a smoker who is trying to be something else. They are hoping their behavior will change while carrying around the same beliefs. The second person declines by saying, "No thanks, I'm not a smoker." It's a small difference, but this statement signals a shift in identity. Smoking was part of their former life, not their current one. They no longer identify as someone who smokes. So when I read this, I have to admit that it was kind of mind-blowing. I had read a lot of junk about self-improvement. One of my vices is that if I have too much free time, I will go to the free section on Amazon Kindle and I will download the self-help book of all of these life coach bros and I will read them. I will hate read them. I have a small hope that I will find a nugget of wisdom in these 23-year-olds with Lambos on their vision boards, but as you can tell, it's not much of a hope. This thought of identity, and as I started to go through my memory, go through my life, and see how it had played out, blew my mind. This revelation for me was honestly probably what you would call life-changing. So I thought about like weightlifting and how I have always come back to it. I may have a terrible injury. I may get sick. I may be have traveled for work for months. And yet I always came back to weightlifting because it was a core part of my identity. I had a really hard time in school growing up. I faced bullying from the time that I was in first grade until I graduated. And I was a very tall, very different, very skinny guy who I think just kind of looked like a natural victim. It was only after high school that I started getting into athletic things, started lifting weights. I found actually that I'm not as natural. I'm still pretty naturally skinny, but not as naturally skinny as I thought. And I became, um, when I was lifting seriously, I became very big and I felt better moving through the world. And so for me, being big became a very important part of my core identity. And that is why, no matter the setbacks, I always came back to it. In fact, sometimes it was probably a problem because I would say, yeah, I'm hurt, but I'm a weightlifter. And what weightlifters do is we push through pain, and I have chronic injuries. There are some issues with identity. It's not always good. You need to be conscious of them, or else they will rule you in your unconscious in both good and bad ways. James goes on to say, improvements are only temporary until they become a part of who you are. The goal is not to read a book. The goal is to become a reader. The goal is not to run a marathon. The goal is to become a runner. And you can see how this is so different from the vapid self-help books and how much more effective this would be. I'm sure that you have things in your own life where you can see that you picked up something for a short period of time and then it was easy to set aside, versus things that you come back to because there's always this nagging sensation that you aren't being your true self when you don't. James Clear notes that identity is a double-edged sword, that you carry all of these narratives around in your head of who you are, and you might let them guide your entire life without ever questioning them. You constantly hear people saying, well, I just can't do that. I'm bad at math. I can't do that. I just absolutely cannot remember names. The problem is that while maybe you do have some extra difficulty with these things, having those statements as your core identity will prevent you from even trying. And if you try hard, if something matters to you, then you can get better at it. That is an absolute truth. The first book I ever read that really sold me on that concept was Grit by Angela Duckworth, which is another, I think, book that we should categorize as practical psychology. I really recommend that book. It will show you the importance of hard work and determination and grit versus talent. It will explain how you can do anything you want to as long as you are willing to try hard enough for long enough. If someone else has done it, then you can do it. So James explains that your habits are how you embody your identity. When you make your bed each day, you embody the identity of an organized person. When you write each day, you embody the identity of a creative person. When you train each day, you embody the identity of an athletic person. So right here is where I spotted a way that identity can become a problem. It's not something that the author calls out in his book, but it is an extremely common issue with writers. Your identity is as a writer, but you don't write. Let's go back to the 3 layers. You can have an identity and you can have the right goals, but you can have the wrong processes. You need to not take what people say as being desperately important for you to do as a writer and analyze if that process is actually moving you towards your goal in a meaningful way. And if you have limited time, which we all do, but some more than others, if you only have an hour a day, are you going to spend that writing, or are you going to spend that doing something else? And if you aren't doing the most effective thing to move you towards your goal, to reinforce that identity, then you don't get to call yourself whatever that identity is. You don't get to claim that identity. A teenager who writes anime fan fiction every day is more of a writer than an esteemed creative writing professor who wrote the one book that it took to get them a tenured position and then quit. That person might be a great professor, but they are not only not a great writer, they aren't a writer at all. Promoting, networking, going to conventions for your one book when you're not writing your next because you're waiting for that book to take off, not only aren't you building up what is necessary for success, or if that book does gain traction, but you are betting on the outside world, on the fruits of your labor, versus the thing that you control, which is working consistently on the right process. Sometimes you have to take a break from writing. Sometimes you're sick, your kids are sick, there's a bunch of overtime at work, you're in a month-long crunch to deliver something. But the thing is that when you get the time, you'll know that you're a writer if you immediately get drawn back to it. For me, it took years away from fiction, but when I changed jobs and I was able to get away from a super high stress environment and a ton of unpaid overtime, it took a minute to adjust to not be in panic flight mode all the time. After a while, when I realized that nothing bad was going to happen, the keyboard called me again. I had been at the keyboard typing code, but you know what I mean. And I started writing. My identity truly was a writer the whole time, but I would not say it. I would not give myself that. It was painful, but I wasn't writing, and I didn't actually know if I was going to be writing again. So I didn't call myself a writer. The same way that studies have recently shown that visualizing success can satisfy your brain enough to actually hinder your progress towards your goals because you're getting the benefit without doing the hard work, and that is what the human brain loves. Calling yourself a writer, being able to maintain that as a part of your core identity without actually doing the hard work of writing, which can be intimidating, which can be extremely tiring, which can be hard to fit into your life, keeps you from doing the actual work that will cause you to be a success as a writer. We all know someone who calls themselves a writer and who says when they just get around to it that they're going to write their book. And they may read about being a writer and they might talk about being a writer all the time, but they never get anywhere. It sounds harsh. More than that, it sounds like I'm being a gatekeeper. I'm just telling you the truth. If you want to grow as a writer, if you want to eventually be a successful writer, you cannot soothe your identity as a writer without doing the writing. Review your processes, review your goals. Are they truly aligned? Understand this: finding success as a writer comes by actually writing. Everything else is secondary. Everything else can be put off. Everything else should be put off until your third or fourth book that's worth publishing, which might not start until your third book. Understand that coming closer and closer to being a great writer and making progress as a professional writer, which will get you more and more time to prioritize your writing as you start to make money writing, creating a virtuous circle, requires writing. I have seen fiction writers with a salesman personality write one book and then push it endlessly. But this is not a sustainable way to make a career. This is not long lasting. This is not growth as a writer. You see it happen more often for people who want to gain some sort of legitimacy to then shift to an easier way to make money, a more guaranteed way, often to become a shovel seller. They write their one book and then they write books on how to edit, on how to market, on how to do this and do that. And all they've ever done is write one book. And they are never going to get any better as a writer, but they aren't really writers. So that works out just fine for them. And you know what they're going to do? They are going to try to sell you on anything they can. And the problem is that when you're sitting alone at your computer, doing what you should do, writing fiction, you are hard to sell to. Yeah, maybe you'll try out the new writing program, the new word processing program. There's not a lot. So they need you to be distracted from that so that they can sell you things, which means that the very loudest people are the ones who also most benefit from when you are not actually moving towards your goal. As long as you're buying their shovel, they don't care about your success. You need to starve the damn shovel sellers. We all do. Stop buying their programs, their books on promotion. If you want to become a great writer, there are only 3 things that you need to do. Write constantly, write copiously, write things that challenge you and stretch you, set a new goal with give yourself a new challenge with every book or story that you start, something that makes you a little bit uncomfortable. Read copiously, read widely, read all sorts of genres, read mostly good books, read some bad books, see why they're bad, and then live a varied and fulfilling life. Don't spend all of your free time promoting. Get off of social networks, except for doing the bare minimum required. Do interesting things. Enjoy time with your family. It'll show up in your writing.